I will talk to you about just something really real that has happened to me, that is currently happening to me, whatever. And this is one of those videos. Fair warning, this will not live on the channel forever, much like those previous videos that I kind of referenced. It will be deleted. It also is going to be pretty like unedited. I'm not saying there will be no edits, but I'm not going to scrub through it and make it perfect. So if that bugs you, good day. And it also will not be monetized. And the reason I mention that is because I will not be censoring myself. YouTube can be very finicky when it comes to that with monetized content. And so, like, a lot of people, when they're talking about sexual assault, they'll say SA. If they're talking about anorexia, they'll say Anna because YouTube doesn't like those words. I don't want to be censored when I'm talking about this topic. So this video will not be monetized. I just feel the need to mention that. If and for obvious reasons, to mention a trigger warning for talking about suicide, as well as I may cry, I may not. I literally never know how I'm going to react whenever I talk about Rodney, my late fiance. There have been times I've gone to tell a story about him, thought I was perfectly fine and was bawling by the end of it. There are times where I don't cry and it just is what it is. It's how I'm reacting to grief. So, but I do want to issue a trigger warning because I have heard that some people like really don't like to watch other people cry like on camera, and I just wanted to give you the option to click away. This will be a heavier video. Not entirely because I don't want it to be a heavier video entirely. I want to talk about some good things. But, overall it is about my late fiance who took his own life 10 years ago this year. I just want to say that I hate the fact that his name and his memory is synonymous with how he passed away. I hate that so much. Whenever he had first passed away, for the first couple of years, when people would ask me or they, found that out about me, they would always ask, how did he die? First of all, I hate that question. Don't ever ask anybody that if they tell you that a loved one passed, because you're not asking for the person who is grieving the loss. You're asking for your own curiosity. And I get being curious, but like it was just very painful. I would have people who would be like really like just not even thinking and like downright insisting to know. And especially because the first year after he passed away, we were engaged. He was my fiance. And so I still wore an engagement ring. I wore it for quite a while. And the reason I stopped wearing it was because I would get questions like, oh my God, are you engaged? And I would have to have that awkward conversation of, no, I'm technically not engaged. He passed away. Oh my God, how? He passed away when I was 22. So it was always shocking for people to hear that, someone who is 22 years old was essentially a widower. I don't know what else to call it, just essentially a widower. And so, of course, people were curious, but it just sucked. And I still to this day hate the fact that that punctuation mark at the end of his life, like, really kind of overshadowed his life and who he was as a person because he really was such a wonderful person. So, because of that, I would love to talk to you guys about who he was and how I came to know him. I knew him for quite a while, quite a long time. This is going to sound really weird, but we were kind of related. Not like that, but basically, I had a great aunt who I was related to by blood, and she was with basically married, common law married, to his uncle. So we weren't blood related, and also it wasn't actually his uncle. He was like unofficially adopted as well, so it was even further, but he was sort of like a cousin. Again, not by blood, nothing like that. But whenever we were kids, we were introduced like, oh, this is your cousin. It's like, oh, cool. And so I had an aunt who lived in North Mississippi, and I would go spend summers at her house and later lived at her house when I was 10 and 11 years old. And she used to babysit him. And so I don't know exactly what age I met him. I know it was before I moved up there. So 9, 8, 9, or 10 years old. My brain always has said 9 years old. I met him. whenever my aunt was babysitting him. And my sister also lived there. And I remember meeting him, and I was like, oh, seems like a cool guy. He had a Game Boy. He shared his games with me. The highest honor, to be completely honest. We bonded over that. I kind of just, I thought he was cool, as 9-year-olds do. I actually remember whenever I went to stay with my aunt one summer, she lived out in the sticks, like out in the middle of nowhere, like takes 15 minutes to get to the nearest grocery store type of thing. And and so these dogs came by. They were very small breed dogs. I think they might have been part miniature pincer. They were just small dogs. I don't know why that's not relevant, maybe. But my aunt was like, do not feed them. They need to move on. We do not need any more dogs. But I would totally feed them. And so I wasn't allowed to name them. So I ended up naming them Girl Dog and Boy Dog, because one was a girl, one was a boy. And it's funny, Boy Dog ended up disappearing. Who knows where he went to. But Girl Dog, I think they must have been bred for hunting, although it's hard to imagine that because, of course, they were just kind of in the middle of nowhere, like maybe they got dropped off or something. But they were definitely like hunters of some kind because they would like hit squirrels and kill them and like eat them. I'm sorry, I know that's gruesome. Um, Girl Dog stuck around though, and I loved Girl Dog. And Girl Dog actually was at my aunt's house for a really long time. My aunt did the thing you all do and relented, like, all right, I guess this dog isn't leaving, and I kind of like this dog too. And so, probably my first real memory of Rodney was he, my sister, and I decided to play hide and seek. And they were hiding, and I was seeking. And so, my aunt lived amongst these woods. I have a lot of good memories of the woods. And she lived in these woods, and so we went to play hide and seek in the woods. I mean, what more fun place is there? And so I was at the base, and I had my eyes covered, and I was counting, and Girl Dog the entire time was just circling me, circling me, circling me. And I'm like, all right, ready or not, here I come. And as soon as I started walking, Girl Dog started sprinting with purpose. And so I'm like, I'm going to trust the dog. So I ran after her, and she kind of like came up on like this embankment and started barking down. And I peered down, and they were hiding in like this ditch like area. And they were like, that's basically cheating. And I was like, I didn't tell her to do it. So it was pretty funny. That was my first real memory of Rodney. Another memory I had was after my aunt stopped babysitting him. I don't know how old we were at this point. Maybe like, I think I was maybe 11. He was 6 months younger than me. So we were about the same age. And although I did hold it over his head several times, like, I'm older than you. And so, his mom was moving in and like essentially like to a house and essentially had something of like a housewarming party, like a barbecue type of thing. And so we were hanging out. We were like the only two kids around the same age there. We were chit chatting. And I don't know how we got to talking about this, but I was like, yeah, like you got it. You still play games? And he's like, yeah, I love games. Like I have a PlayStation in there. I'm like, oh man, there's this PlayStation game I love. It's called Legend of Dragoon. And he was like, I love that game. I have that game. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I've never beaten it before. I always get stuck on things. And he's like, yeah, I'm stuck against this one boss that, powers you down and it's like a pain in the butt and you can't transform into a dragoon. And I was like, me too. And so we bonded over that. We went and played, but obviously, I had to go on home, so it's not like we made it very far into the game, but that was also a really funny memory that I have of him. So we kind of just seemed to like come back into each other's lives every few years. So we, lost touch because of course we had no real control over ever seeing each other. We were at the whim of the adults in our lives. And but whenever I was 13 or 14, I don't know what happened. His mom was going through a really bad breakup, which that was the story of her life. We'll get back to his mother in a minute. And so she really needed to talk to someone, and she knew my aunt, and somehow through my aunt ended up connecting with my mom. And so my mom went to her house and basically like sat with her. They talked, and they became really good friends. And as a result, me and Rodney started spending more time together, and we actually dated when I was in high school. He was my first high school boyfriend. I was 14. We dated for 6 whole months. And It was like kind of long distance because he was 6 months younger than me. I went to the high school and he was in the middle school. So we didn't really see each other that often. We really mainly saw each other when, our moms would meet. And of course, we always begged for that. And, but we didn't get to see each other at school or anything like that. And, but of course, we talked on the phone all the time. We might have talked on like Yahoo Messenger or something. I don't know that he had a computer at that point. I think we just talked on the phone. And, I mean, I really cared about him as much as you can, a 14-year-old. But I got very tired of the fact that he was constantly grounded all the time. So I would have to go like weeks without hearing from him. And so as a result of that, I ended up breaking up with him. His mother. This is really hard to talk about because I never want to cast any sort of blame for what happened. But his mother fucking sucked. He had a lot of trauma, and a lot of it was due to his mother and also the people she chose to date because she always had to be in a relationship. He told me about this one guy that she was with that, like, when they broke up, he put all of their belongings in a shed and burned it to the ground. So, like, all of Rodney's clothes, his toys, his video games, everything, just burned it. He was just a piece of shit. So you can imagine while she was with him, he was very nice to them. Not. But his mother herself was just fucking terrible. She and I honestly bickered a fair amount. I would argue with her a lot. She probably didn't like me, but I didn't like her. And she's just a hateful person. I do know she had bipolar disorder, and she has a lot of mental health issues herself. Rodney actually ran away from home whenever he was 16, and she had actually done the same. She had run away from home when she was 17. And, I don't know, she was just hateful. Like, she just seemed to hate him sometimes. It's hard to really talk about. I know one of the times, and I hate even saying this, but because it was the final straw that led me to break up with him in high school, because I was just tired of him constantly being grounded. He would do the dishes every single night. Every night, do the dishes. They didn't live in a fancy house or anything that had a dishwasher. And it was Rodney, his mother, and their pawpaw. We just called him pawpaw. And so Rodney would always do the dishes. And one night, pawpaw was like, hey, don't worry about it. I got it. I'll do the dishes. Rodney was like, thank you. So the next day, he's sitting at the table eating breakfast, and he's playing video games. And his mom is like kind of like doing something, and she like, says like, hey, thanks for doing those dishes last night. And he's distracted. He's not paying attention. He's like, oh yeah, sure, you're welcome. And she's like, you liar. Your grandpa did the dishes. You lied to my face. You're grounded for 2 weeks. Shit like that. Like, why? Why? Whenever he ran away from home, she, ended up, he ended up getting tracked down. And it ended up being a really good thing because he went to live with his dad. It wasn't his biological father. It was just he was somebody who his mother was with whenever Rodney was very young, and he continued to have a relationship with Rodney. And so he went to live with his dad after that, and honestly, it was the best possible thing to get away from his mother. But literally, like, as soon as they found him, she was in like a semi-long distance relationship with somebody who lived about an hour and a half away. So like, during the week, they would be at their respective houses, and then they would spend every weekend together. She would drive up on Friday nights and come back on Sundays. She still went, like, literally the day they found him. Maybe even it was the day after. I don't freaking know. But she still went. And I asked him later when we were adults, like, what was that conversation like when she found you? Well, she didn't find, the, like, authorities did, whenever you came home. And he goes, she bit my head off because I stole this like huge store of change that she had. But yeah, honestly, his whole story was crazy. Whenever he ran away, he sold his Xbox and somehow hitched a ride. He walked for a ways to get away from the house, to get away from people like that would know him or his pawpaw, because of course it's a small rural area. And he hitched a ride to the Greyhound bus station and took a bus to Oregon, where he had a girlfriend there. And I don't really know the full story there. I know he lived in a shelter for a short while. He was gone like a week. But he did go and see her and stuff. And I don't know. Like, there were so many conflating things because, of course, when they found him, he convinced them, like, don't make me go home. And whenever he talked to, like, the detectives and everything, they basically were like, we don't want to bring you back home for you to run away again. So, like, tell us what's going on, what we can do, why you ran away, etc. And basically, that was how they came to the agreement that he should move in with his dad. But yeah, that was all she had said to him. She just was mad at him for stealing her change. She just fucking sucked. I don't know what else to say. Honestly, I could probably sit here and rattle off more stories about her and like the pieces of shit that she would date, but I gotta like not think about it, to be honest. So from there, we didn't have much contact. We ended up being at the same high school, but we didn't see each other very often or anything. Like, we didn't really, talk. We just kind of like looked at each other, Sorry, that sounds weird. If we like passed each other in the hall, we'd give each other the nod or whatever, but we never like stopped and had a full blown conversation. I'd kind of broken up with him. He was really sad for a while. And honestly just sucked all around. But, it was one of those things. Like, he moved on, he had girlfriends. I moved on. I had a pretty long-term high school boyfriend. And I do remember whenever we became adults, we randomly were chatting on Yahoo Messenger a little bit. It was very innocent though. It wasn't like, oh, I miss him or anything like that. He was always like the nicest guy. And so how we ended up reconnecting and dating as adults, I was 19 and his pawpaw passed away, his pawpaw that he had lived with. And I had known his pawpaw. His pawpaw was a good guy. He was a nice guy. And so he passed away and my mom was out of town and my mom was like, you need to go to the funeral. And I was like, I don't want to go to the funeral. I don't want to go to a funeral. And she was like, I can't be there. You need to go. You need to be there. And so begrudgingly I went. And so, I went, I saw my uncle, kind of gave him a hug and we were kind of talking. And I look up and I see Rodney. And I'm going to be completely honest. My very first thought was, damn, he looks good. He had been working out. He wanted to join the military. He wanted to join the Marines. And that ended up falling through because they had to do like PT tests in person and his dad would never bring him and he didn't drive at the time. I think he drove. He just didn't have a vehicle. Like, he needed to rely on his dad and he still lived with his dad because he was 18. And so, yeah, that was my first thought was, damn, you looked good. And it's funny because later on when we were dating, people would always ask, like, oh, how'd you guys meet? And I'd be like, well, we've known each other for years, but, his pawpaw passed. And I'd be like, so you picked him up at a funeral? I'm like, no, please don't say that. But I did tell him, like, hey, let me give you my number if you ever want to talk. And we ended up talking, and he had told me there that, like, he was trying to be supportive of his mother because that was her father that passed away, but that like they hadn't talked in like years since he had run away essentially. Like, they talked a little bit when he was supposed to, but pretty much as soon as he turned 18 and he didn't have to talk to her, he didn't talk to her. And he didn't talk to her much in between then. And so he was telling me like that it was kind of weird to like be around her again and he's trying to be nice and this and that and you know, again, he was a very kind person. And so I was like, well, if you ever want to talk, here's my number. Again, I swear I sound like I'm like slide into my DMs, but I swear that was not the intention. Or maybe it was at this point. I don't know. But I used to vehemently say like, no, that wasn't it. But I also have to admit that my first thought when I saw him was, wow, he looks good. So we ended up talking, and then he would come and spend like long weekends with me. And because he kind of lived pretty far away, I had a reliable car and could drive, but I mean, he still lived like a good 45 minutes away. So whenever we saw each other, like we had to mean it. But we honestly, it was a lot of fun. And he ended up moving in with me because his dad was religious and basically giving him crap every time he'd come to my house for the weekend. Like, I don't know, like living in sin essentially. So rather than him having to deal with his dad, give him crap about living in sin, we just moved in together super early. And so it's kind of complicated to explain my trajectory because whenever I first went to college, I lived in North Mississippi, same area that he lived in, but I moved to South Mississippi. And then I ended up moving back to North Mississippi to live with my mom for a bit and to get community college credits. And that's where I met Rodney. But once I was done getting those credits, I wanted to go back to South Mississippi to go back to university and, get my degree. So we had been together maybe 6 months whenever I basically was like, hey, I know we haven't been together that long considering, but like, I really would love it if you came with me to South Mississippi. And he was like, absolutely. There's nothing for me here. There's nothing in North Mississippi. I don't know if you guys knew that. It's funny. My sister still lives up there and she would probably say otherwise, but God, there really is nothing up there. And so he had always wanted to get out of Mississippi. And honestly, because he ran away to Oregon, I do want to go to Oregon one day. It is like a bucket list thing. He was in Salem, but I do have a friend of mine who moved from here and she lives in Oregon, so I would probably go see her. I'm not going to out where she lives, but yes, but it's not in Salem. But because he talked about how beautiful it was up there and whatnot. But he's like, I remember I was talking like, would you want to move to Oregon one day? And he was like, no, I just picked a place and went. But he did want to get out of North Mississippi, and so he moved with me, and we lived in this house. It was a pretty good sized house. It was a 3-bedroom, so it was me and him, a good friend of mine, and her girlfriend at the time, who, God, and then a fifth roommate who we don't have much contact now. Like we'll every now and then, send pictures of our kids and whatnot. But she is a dear friend of mine. I love her. And we didn't know each other, so honestly that worked out great because she and I became really good friends. And so we lived in this house, and honestly, some of the best years of my life in that house. I was really, truly so happy and in such a good place. I was in college. I was in love. Like, yeah, there were definitely stressful times and times where I was like, because I was working a fair bit, and in school. And if anybody's ever done that, you know that it's incredibly difficult. But yeah, I just was really happy and was really in love with him. We were kind of living on love and that was it. We didn't have a lot of money. He worked full time at a Chick-fil-A and honestly, I would not have a college degree if not for him. Um yeah, because he really like was the one that helped support me and everything. He supported me in every way. If I had to categorize our relationship at the time, I would say that it was really goofy. We really had fun together. I remember one of my really good friends, the one who we lived with her and her girlfriend. I say we lived with them. We all lived together. She could hear us doing like the Key and Peele sketch. I don't know if you guys have, some of you have probably seen it, and many of you probably haven't, but basically it's like this toxic relationship where it's this guy named Andre and this girl named Megan. And he's like, Megan! He's like such a bro. And she's like, no, no. And my friend talked about how she could hear us in the room being like, Megan, but it's your jacket though. And it always cracked her up because I would always be the dude and Rodney would always be the chick. And that always cracked her up to hear us. We were very much like that couple that people were like, wow, they're like really in love and really happy and all that stuff. I will say one of the downsides of our relationship, and I don't know if I would say it like that, but basically one of the things that made it so much harder whenever I lost him was I had a really bad childhood. And I feel like a lot of people say that. I used to resist the urge to say, oh, I had a bad childhood, because I feel like a lot of people feel like they had a bad childhood. And I just never wanted people to be like, oh, I was just being dramatic. But like wide brushstrokes, this is a heavy video, so trigger warning for some heavy shit coming. But my mom was married to someone. He was her second husband, and for like 6 years, molested me and my sister countless times. And several close family members of mine were on like hard drugs, and I really did not have a stable childhood. I lived in a lot of different places and with other people, other relatives. Um, we ended up later like going to trial and pressing charges on him, and the whole trial process was absolutely brutal. It was one of the hardest things I've been through other than losing Rodney. And so naturally, as a result of that, I was really sad. I had a lot of issues. I really should have gone to therapy much sooner than I did. And I started therapy in college actually, because it was free. Well, it was included in the very expensive tuition, but so free. But I should have been in therapy much sooner. And so I had a really terrible childhood, and I felt like there was a lot of times in which I wasn't happy, and I felt very broken. I felt like a broken person. And one of the ways I felt like a broken person was that I would like date people, and I would break up with them. I would always be the one to break up with people. And basically, in my mind at the time, although adult grown Matey knows better, but in my mind at the time, I'd be like, these are perfectly nice people, and yet I can't see a future with them, so I break up with them. I'm just this heartbreaker and this and that. And it's funny because whenever me and Rodney first started talking, I really resisted the idea of dating him because I didn't want to break his heart. And I was like, "Ugh, I'm just going to get tired of him and be done." And like my mom used to say, like I had commitment issues, that which sounds, I'm not trying to like dog on my mom, but she used to say that I had commitment issues because I could never fully explain why it was that I didn't want to be with certain people. Because not every ex I've ever had has been like a piece of crap. I have dated some shitty people, but like some of them were nice people. And I still like broke up with them because like I couldn't see a future with them. And now adult Mandy knows better. I know that it's because like just because human beings aren't Barbies that you can mush together. You can have nice person A and nice person B. Just because there's two nice people doesn't mean they belong together. And so I never realized like the answer could just simply be maybe you just don't have deep enough feelings for them. You're looking for something deeper. But I always felt bad because I don't want to like toot my own horn. Like they always had deeper feelings for me, but they were very heartbroken. And so when Rodney and I got together, I kind of resisted it. And then when I realized like he was the first person, now mind you, I was 19 years old. It's not like I dated all that many people. Like, I didn't, it was just dumb, but that is how I felt. And so whenever I realized I had a deeper feeling for him, that I could see a future with him, that was huge for me. And then the other half is that bad childhood and me being really depressed and unhappy over the years, I was so happy with him. I was so happy and in love. And I used to think to myself, like, I deserve this. This is for me because I dealt with so much heartache and so much terribleness as a child. And I went through so much that this is me. This is my ending that I deserve and that I get to have. And that's not like, I don't think I ever like vocalized that to Rodney, but it was how I felt. That's a lot of pressure to put on a person. And I think sometimes I wonder if like subconsciously I put that pressure on him, but it made it that much harder to lose him. It really did because I just, if you have that mindset and this beacon of light in your life goes out, it's gone, and you put that on them like this is my thing. This is I obviously I can't come up with the words, but like this is my reward for having gone through all that, and it's gone the way I felt. And I don't mean to make this about me because like I really hate to think about like how much he suffered and what went through his head whenever he passed away. So I guess we'll get to when he passed away. So we lived in that house, and my good friend and her girlfriend broke up, thank God. And because that girl was hella toxic. And so she ended up in a new relationship, and she was going to move out and be with her new girlfriend after a time. And so me, Rodney, and roommate number 3, we decided to go get our own apartment. And Rodney, who he worked at a Chick-fil-A, he left Chick-fil-A and got a new job because he was just tired of working there. And the boss, the man, not even the boss, the owner was kind of an ass. And so he got a new job he was pretty excited about. I will say it was night shift. And if you've ever worked a night shift job, you would know that night shift sucks. So there's that. But he didn't seem like that affected by it. But honestly, he only worked there maybe 6 weeks before he passed away. And I still remember the last time I saw him. It was really bad weather. And he worked in the next town over. That's just where he got a job. And I kind of wanted him to stay. I remember I was like, maybe you should call out. Like, the weather's supposed to be really bad. It's supposed to rain a lot. Like, you know, I'm really worried about you making that drive. And of course it was at night because he worked night shift. And he was like, no, I'm fine. It'll be okay. I'm going to go to work. And I gave him a hug and I gave him a kiss. And I said, you know, I love you. Please drive safe. And I'm really grateful that that's the last thing that I said to him. I will always be grateful. And so he left and he went to work. And whenever he got off work, he bought the supplies, the things that he used to take his own life. He drove somewhere. And I'm being vague because, like, whenever they found him, he was like, you know, he was in like off of a dirt road into some woods. And the cops actually asked, like, oh, did he grow up around here? Not a lot of locals know about this place, which is really strange. And yeah, I don't know. I kind of think maybe he drove around until he found something. But he drove and he did it. And I don't want to say how he did it because it's really gruesome and it's really brutal. And he ended up having a closed casket funeral because it was so bad. And so from my perspective, he went to work, and I told him whenever he went to work, I'm like, hey, you have to get home. Like, you can't stay late, because sometimes he would stay late. He got off at 7. I'm like, because I have to be at work at 8 and I need the car. And so, but it was like a very tight window because he worked in the next town over. He got off at 7. He would have to leave straight away. And so when he didn't get home, I did remember feeling a little bit of anxiety. Something important to mention is that, excuse me, he didn't have a cell phone. We were poor. I had a cell phone, and it's because my dad paid for it. And so every now and then he would have a cell phone that he could like connect to Wi-Fi, but that was it. And so, and generally he just didn't seem to care to have one. He had never really grown up having one. So he didn't have a phone for me to like text him or call him. And so he, when he didn't come home, I did remember feeling anxious, and my roommate drove me to work because it was right by the university. And I went to work, I went to a morning class, and I actually had a therapy appointment that day because I had started going to therapy to deal with that childhood trauma that I brought up. And I don't know why, but I had a pit in my stomach, and I canceled my therapy appointment, and I went home. And when I saw that the car wasn't there, my heart dropped. I didn't immediately think, oh my gosh, you know, he's taken his own life. I didn't think that, but I did think something very bad had happened. And so I didn't know what to do. Now, he had friends who worked at Chick-fil-A with him, but he also had a couple of friends who worked at this new place with him. I don't know why I'm being vague. It was a Walmart. He worked at a Walmart. So he had friends that worked at Walmart. And so I wondered, I'm like, maybe they got together, hung out, fell asleep at a friend's house. And I had mentioned it to a few people. I mentioned it to my roommate at the time. And I mentioned it to a good friend of mine. And they all were like, no, I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure he just fell asleep. So I stayed at the house and waited all day. And my roommate at the time was in the military. She was in the National Guard. And so she had to go to drill every like once a month. And so I asked her, I was like, can I bring you to drill and use your car? And she said yes. So I used her car. I drove to the Walmart in the next town over, and I waited for him to go to work. And I went into the Walmart. I found the manager, and I asked the manager if he had gotten in yet, and he said no. And I hate to sidebar, but I will sidebar. Rodney's father always feels like something happened to Rodney, that someone hurt Rodney, that it wasn't self inflicted. I've learned through therapy and many other things that this is extremely common, just life experience, that this is so common. People don't want to believe that their loved one took their own life. And, sorry, people upstairs stomping. And so whenever I went up to that manager and I was like, hey, I'm looking for Rodney, he's like, it's strange he's not in yet, and neither is this other coworker. That's the only thing that has ever stood out to me as an alarm bell going off of like maybe something else happened. And to this day, I have no idea. And so I will say I was still very much anxious, but I did feel somewhat at peace. I'm like, okay, he's friends with that coworker. They definitely just went to that coworker's house and went to sleep. And so I went home an anxious wreck, and I laid on the couch, and I ended up dozing off. And that old coworker that hadn't showed up, and a couple of Rodney's friends showed up at my house at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and they were like, hey, we're all on lunch and we are worried because Rodney never came in, and the manager said you had come looking for him. And I asked the coworker, I can't remember his name, so I'm not being vague intentionally. My brain's saying Patrick, but I have no idea. I asked him, I was like, what happened? Why were you late? And he was like, I overslept. And he's like, I'm like, was he never with you? And he's like, no, he left. He left, whenever he got off. Like, I never saw him. And so I fully panicked. I called, my city's police department, and God of mercy, it was a whole fucking thing because my city was saying the other city's town over, like, where Rodney worked, their police department needed to handle it because that's where he was last seen. And then they were saying that my city's police department needed to handle it because that's where he lived. And literally, I called them back and forth multiple times, and finally was like, I don't care. I don't give a damn. Someone needs to do something. And so me and my roommate went to the police station, gave pictures of the car. I posted things on Facebook, like this is where he was last seen. And we looked for him for 2 days. My mom drove down because she didn't live in South Mississippi. I think she still lived in North Mississippi. No, she lived in Louisiana. She drove down, and we drove around looking for him. And we didn't find him. And so Sunday morning, this happened, I believe, on a Friday, but it was a Sunday morning. The detective of the next town over, because they were the ones that took over the missing person case, because of course he was last seen at work, they had camera footage of him leaving alone and driving in the opposite direction than he usually would. They called us and asked us to come down to the station, and they told us they had found him and that it strongly indicated that he had taken his own life. And it's sort of like a movie. Whenever they told me, like, my mom was like, come here, and hugged me and was sobbing. And I remember I just could hear like white noise, like static. Like I felt like I had like floated out of my body and I wasn't in it. And I remember thinking like, I don't know, like, just like, maybe you need to say something or you need to acknowledge, but like, I couldn't. And so, we just all sat there, and initially I called his dad because of course his dad knew he was missing. I let his dad know that he was missing. And the first thing his dad said was like, he's always like been a little bit dark, and basically said like he believed that he did in fact take his own life. And I will always feel terrible for this, but I always have believed that too. I can't explain why. And that's probably the hardest thing, is that people have looked to me for answers. Why do you think he did it? Were you guys fighting? What's the last thing you guys said to each other? What was his state of mind? So, from my perspective, we had just moved into a new apartment that was a little cheaper than where we've been living. And so we were kind of happy about that. We were kind of happy about having to pay a little less. He was happy to get away from Chick-fil-A. He was happy. Sorry. I have to move this blanket. He was happy to have another job. And he had seemed like really low, run down and low energy working night shift. But like I have worked night shift, and so same. I remember his birthday was on New Year's, and I had bought him like this chocolate peanut butter cake thing, and I had made him some chili because he liked chili, and like he was happy with that. And so he had passed away January 22nd, 2016, and he was 22. And like it's so hard to feel like some part of it's my fault. And I know people are gonna be like, Mady, it's not your fault. But like his family, like I was the only one, like me and my roommate were the only ones around him. So his family has always looked at me and been like, how did you not know? I don't know. I will say I've worked in the healthcare system. The people who do it, they don't say they're gonna do it a lot of the time. The people who say they're going to do it, it's a cry for help. But a lot of the time, and I'm not saying every time, they don't ever say anything. And but I still feel like as like the person that was closest to him, like I should have known. And I will always hold that. I will always like hate that I just didn't know. And if you had to ask me, like, maybe what were the signs, there had to have been signs. I don't know why this stands out to me, but it does. Um, Whenever, I don't even remember, it was sometime when we lived in the big house with all the roommates and we were generally pretty happy. I had mentioned to him, I'm like, I was basically going over a to-do list and I was like, we have to do this and this and this. And he was like, it never ends, does it? There's always something to do. There's always something. There's always something. And I was like, yeah, that's life. That's how it is. And he's like, yeah. And I also remember like he really enjoyed playing video games. That was his hobby. He would hang out with friends and they would play like tabletop RPGs, think like D&D and stuff. That's almost like a video game too. And I remember one time he also said to me like, what happens when I don't care to save the princess? What happens when I don't care about this? I don't care about that. And in hindsight, I realized like he really was missing like a purpose or something for fulfillment. And I'll always feel guilty because so much of like, I don't want to say his life, but like so much of what he did it for me. He worked hard for me. And we had conversations like, oh, like, do you think you'd ever want to go to college? Like, what about you? Maybe we should look into getting you in school. And he was always pretty firm, like, I don't know what I want to do. So, and you actually do have a path. So let's work on that. And then once you get out of college, you'll be able to get a better paying job and we won't struggle so much if I go to school. Sounds good to me. And so that was just kind of always the plan. Like every now and then we would talk about it and he like kind of would program like little games and things like that. But like fully he never fully like, developed that. I feel like he was also just a multi-talented individual. Like he would play in his dad's band and he played pretty good guitar. And, he played games and he programmed games. He was also just a very patient, kind person. He was a friend to everyone. Like, I remember whenever we first got together and moved in together, my roommate at the time did not like me. My roommate at the time loved Rodney. I remember them like playing Magic the Gathering together. And I just thought it was so funny that, you know, my roommate at the time, like, barely wanted to talk to me, didn't care for me too much, but was like, oh, Rodney's great. Because he really was. And he was so funny. He was such a funny person. Oh, I felt like all we did together was laugh. Honestly, like, whenever I think of him and his aura, I think of Robin Williams. All he did was make people laugh. And I know it's such a cliche to say, but like, he really was just such a bright light in this world. And he was such a kind person, a person people were drawn to. And I feel like he would be that person that would, you know, consider like, oh, that person has a flat. Maybe I should pull over and see if they need some help. Like, he was that person. Um, yeah. I will say his mom does have a lot of mental health issues, and his mom has attempted to take her own life before. I don't know that he had like bipolar disorder, but I do know that like schizophrenia ran in his family. And anytime I've ever brought this up to like a doctor or a therapist, they usually quickly shut me down. But based on the morning that he died, because he and I weren't married, I didn't get to see any of like the evidence firsthand. I didn't get to see everything. But his dad did talk to me at length about it. Sometimes a lot. Sometimes I would be awake at like 2 in the morning because he was messaging me and I felt like I had to respond and I had to talk to him. And his dad said that whenever he left, he looked like he wasn't even there. Whenever he walked out of work, he had when he needed to do what he did. It looked like he wasn't even, like the lights were on, no one was home. Like he was in a state of psychosis. And the roommate that I've mentioned a few times is like in the medical field. And she mentioned that that is a thing that can happen. And she's talked to me, honestly, like whenever I was pregnant, one of Rodney's family members reached out to me wanting answers and everything. It was very much, I actually talked about it in one of those deleted videos, but it was very much, it almost came off as, I really shouldn't say this, but it kind of came off as like someone who watched a lot of true crime and was like, I'm going to crack the case. Like it didn't come off as like a, I love him and it's always haunted me way. It came off as like, I'm going to solve this, you know. But because she, and I gave her like all the information that I had on it, even though it came off that way, but it really did mess me up for a while. And so I reached out to our old roommate because she was technically the other person that was closest to him. And I basically asked if like she believed he took his own life. And side note, she was very supportive in general the whole time. Like she's really a wonderful person. And she said that at first she didn't believe it, but having gone through, you know, school and everything, she realized, like, you know, that she felt like he maybe entered like a state of psychosis. And, you know, it's crazy that even like almost 10 years later, like her saying that, like, did give me some peace. There was also some other weird things, like he would sleepwalk, and like have full blown conversations and things like that. But like that's just some random shit that I'm like trying to like think like what else? What else? What else? So yeah. I will say like there was and still is like a significant like lack of closure. I am a big closure person, but unfortunately in life you just can't always get closure. And just how abrupt it was, you know. One night I went to sleep and he was around and the next day he was gone. And I did write a poem. I am not a poet person, so if you're like cringing at this, it's okay. um, so basically, I had gone to the place where he died a few times, a couple months after he passed. And it was, like I said, it was off of a gravel road near like a wooded area. And it was like he had done it like right where the woods began, but I actually like went and walked through the woods. I remember I saw a puddle shaped like a heart and I thought maybe that was a sign from him, which feels really silly, but yeah. And I would go there sometimes and question and I don't know, think about him and everything. So here's my cheesy ass poem. Returning is what it's called. It was summer, 6 months after the fact, when I finally went there. You had chosen to do it in a quiet wooded place just off a lonely side road. I never know what to expect when I go to the last place you were. Maybe I will hear the tree that once fell in the forest. Perhaps I will find the suicide note that you never left. It was winter, 1 year after the fact when I returned. The grass was no longer matted where the car was parked. Nature had taken that spot back. I placed some flowers down and I listened to your favorite songs. I can still hear the strumming of your guitar. The melody lingers long after the music has faded. It was fall, too many months after the fact when I returned. The trees had lost their vibrant leaves, but the birds echoed to make their presence known. A gate had been placed to block entry, but I went around it in hopes that you would give me some answers, that I would finally hear the crash of the tree, the paper would fly into my hands, or a tune of you would reach my ears. But you only left me with silence. Some part of me feels silly to cry this much when it's been 10 years. I mean, I'm okay. I'm not like a hot mess, but I don't know. Some part of me feels silly. And I know people are going to be like, "Man, you don't feel silly." But like I do. Um I still carry like scars from it emotionally. One of the biggest day-to-day things, and Henry is very supportive of me, is that I very much like panic if I haven't heard from someone in a while. I will message them like, "Hey, how are you?" Like one time, I have a friend who her phone had gotten stolen, and like I like found her mom on Facebook and contacted her like, "Hey, I haven't heard from my friend in a while. Where is she? Is she okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, her phone got stolen. She's working on getting all that stuff back." To this day, like Henry has a job where he has to drive around Missouri a lot, around where we live, and so he will always text me when he's made it safely somewhere, and he knows that that's something that I need. And I really appreciate him for not like feeling like this is dumb, that's obnoxious, this and that. It also has affected like, and I feel almost bad saying this, but I also feel like I've been filming for a while, so hopefully the people that don't need to hear this won't hear this, but I also don't ask for help a lot anymore. Whenever you've gone through something, people tend to be like, "Well, if you need help, please reach out, please reach out." And I did have experiences of reaching out after Rodney passed and people not coming to help. I don't think anything could feel worse than that. um, they say when you go through a tragedy, like, who the real ones are. And I really did. Like, there were people who I would say were more like acquaintances who came forward, and people who were friends that kind of disappointed me. And that's just kind of the way things go sometimes. But I don't ask for help. It's interesting because I don't know that I would have realized that had I not had a baby, 5 months ago, almost 6 months ago. People tell me all the time, like, "Oh, if you need help, call me, blah, blah, blah." I will not. Because it's so disappointing to be like just in the thick of things to ask someone for help and for them to be like, "No, I will not." So, yeah, so I don't, still to this day, 10 years later, I do not ask for help. The other thing, and this could be a whole long story as it is, but like, I feel like I made some really bad decisions after he passed away because of the trauma I was holding on to. One of which was like the guy that I like dated. So I dated two people in between Rodney and Henry, my husband. If I feel like people who are watching this know that that's my husband, but whatever. I have a husband. His name is Henry. And one was serious and one was not serious. And so the not serious guy was a dick. And I remember he was the first person I dated, and I let him pressure me into sex. Nothing It was consensual, but I did let him pressure me into sex. And it was because, like, I just was like, well, I'm never going to want to have it with anybody else again anyway. So I need to just rip the Band-Aid off and sleep with someone else because, like, I'm 22 years old. What am I going to become, a nun? Like, I need to just go ahead and just sleep with someone. And, like, that was, he pressured me into that knowing that I had lost someone, and it was really shitty. He also used to be like really shitty to me in general. And when I would point out, like, hey, you're being kind of an asshole, he'd be like, well, everyone in your life coddles you. And I'm the only one that's willing to treat you the way the real world's going to treat you. So you don't need to continue to be coddled. Like, you need to move on. And I'm going to help you do that by being a piece of shit, I guess. And the sad thing is, at the time, I was like, maybe his logic makes sense. Maybe it's sound. And I feel like the matey before I lost Rodney would not have put up with that. I don't know though, because the guy I dated before Rodney kind of sucked too. Not to that level, but he kind of sucked. And the real ones know that I actually did get married. The second person I dated after Rodney, 4 years after Rodney passed away, we got married. I met him on Tinder, which is weird. I've never met anybody like that. I've always known I'm very much a friends first kind of person. And he wasn't great either. Now, he wasn't a dickhead, but like, he was terrible about keeping a job, and he wasn't a very good partner. Not a bad person, just not a good partner. Like, very much like, when I say partner, I mean like, when I think of a partner, I think of someone who's like in the trenches with you. They're in it with you. Like, they help clean up, they help cook, they go to work. He didn't do any of that. He was a very emotionally mature person though. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, I didn't love him. But I did not love him the way I loved Rodney. And I actually knew that at the time. I wrote it in one of my journals saying, like, he's not the one. I already had the one, but maybe he's like the two. And I was trying to be joking and playful, but like, I knew. And you might be like, well, maybe why the hell did you marry him then? I genuinely felt like I was never going to love anyone the way that I loved Rodney. I knew I could love again. I just did not feel like I was on that level of loving anyone the way that I loved Rodney, because I wasn't the same person. And that is how I felt. I feel like people out there would probably agree with me. But I actually don't agree with that. I don't. And so it was a big factor in me leaving that marriage. There was a whole slew of other things, and that is, I don't know that that's a story I'll ever tell. Maybe one day when I leave YouTube, I'll tell the story on the way out. But like, there was a whole slew of other things. But I knew when I married him. And if anyone's like, Matey, that's terrible. That's fair. I will say, like, when I was with him, he was very weird about the fact that I had a dead fiance. He was very weird about it. He felt like, oh, I'm never going to measure up. I'm never going to live up to that no matter what I do, yada, yada, yada. And to be honest, no, he couldn't have. But that doesn't mean no one could have, which is what I didn't know at the time. I felt like no one could ever measure up. That wasn't true. It just happened that he couldn't measure up. I know that sounds awful and terrible, but again, I point you to Exhibit A. He was not a good partner. But again, we go back to Matey in her much, much younger years dating people that seem like good people that in theory could be a good fit. But again, nice person A and nice person B aren't soulmates just because they're nice people. It's not like that. And so, I don't feel like the Matey of before I had experienced the loss of Rodney, I don't feel like that Matey would have married him. I don't. And I will say, whenever we did get divorced, initially, I didn't want to tell him, like, I just don't love you the way that I loved Rodney. He kind of had to pull it out of me. I don't know why I'm saying he had to pull it out of me. And he was like, there's something else. And whenever I told him that, he was like, well, of course you don't. Like, you're broken. You're not the same Matey that you were before. So why would you love someone the same way? Of course the love for me is going to feel lesser. And I will always be proud of myself because I was like, you know what? Yes, I did go through a trauma, but I am not broken. And I can go out there and I can love someone on the same level that I loved Rodney. I can love someone who really truly does feel like my best friend, someone I can laugh with, someone that I can build a life with. I can love that person. And unfortunately, it's just not you. I didn't say that at the time. I did say, like, I don't love you the same way. And he basically was like, he was trying to be nice about it, but didn't realize that it was really patronizing to be like, but yes, you are broken, little baby bird, and I will repair your wing, and one day you will fly again. Um, no. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I laugh a little when I'm uncomfortable. I've also had this is glass of wine numero dos, and it was like tall glass wine, and I have not drank in quite a while. Something else I kind of wanted to touch on that's really random, but I don't know. People get weird when I talk about Rodney and when I talk about like how much I loved him and how much I cared for him. Something I will always appreciate is that my husband Henry does not get weird. Whenever Henry and I first got together, I felt like I talked about Rodney a lot. And the reason being was because my ex-husband did not like me talking about Rodney. I couldn't talk about Rodney freely. I couldn't tell a funny story or a story that made me happy about Rodney because he was weirdly, and some might argue not weirdly, he was threatened by Rodney. He was threatened by the memory of him. And again, I'm sure someone out there will think, well, he should have been, maybe like you left him because he didn't measure up. That was not the only reason, but yes, it did factor into things. Um, and Henry has never felt that way. But some people do make me feel weird for like how Rodney's death still affects me when I talk about like, yeah, I loved him. He was one of the loves of my life. I remember when the 5-year anniversary, hit whenever Rodney passed away. Every year this time of year, I take time and I think about him and I try to think of good things and I reflect. And so I had posted something on Facebook about him. And a good friend of mine, and I don't think she meant ill, she meant well enough. She reached out and was basically, at this point, I was having serious marital problems because me and my ex were not married that long. We were only married a year. Um, she like basically reached out and was like, I feel like you're still in love with Rodney, and like that's partially what's contributing to your marital problems and this and that. And like, I never know how to respond to that. It's such a weird thing. It's easier now that time has passed, but when people, so the therapist I had in college that I mentioned, because I mentioned I started therapy in college, she was not the best. I mean, again, it was free therapy. She was not the best. And so our last session together, I think she was trying to say something profound. It was our last session because I was graduating. She was trying to say something profound and like it was just weird, but she basically was like, you can tell me that you'll always love him for the rest of your life and you're never going to let him go and like that's your prerogative. And like I get where she's coming from on some level of like I'm never going to let him go, like if I had that mindset, but like I just feel strange and people make me feel weird that I still shed tears over Rodney, that I still care about Rodney and I care about the memory of what his life was because he lived such a full life. He was such an amazing person. People make me feel weird about that. And I will always be grateful that Henry is not one of them. Henry has always strongly said, like, no, like, that is part of you. That is part of who you are. I love everything about you and who you are. And you don't have to feel bad about, the fact that someone you loved passed away. And I will always be grateful that Henry feels that way. I will say, Henry and I were friends before we were, together. And one of the things I said to Henry whenever I told him, like, hey, I have feelings for you, is I said, all my life, I have seen people who have like a love that's like a 7 or an 8, 70 to 80% there. They're happy enough, they're okay, they're content. Sure, they love each other, but it's not like that soulmate level love. And I really do feel like that is something that I had with Rodney. It's not that 100% love. And I thought that that love was gone. I thought I had my 100%. That's a once in a lifetime thing. It's gone. And it's not gone because I feel that for you. I feel like we are and could be, because, of course we weren't together yet. We were just friends. But I'm like, we could be that. We could be 100%. And 80%, 90%, I feel like we all know couples that even maybe sometimes like 60%, um, that they're kind of miserable together. And you wonder, like, why are you together? Why are you guys together? I guess out of habit at this point for the kids. Like, what you doing together? You see those couples and you know that they probably aren't each other's soulmate, but they seem content enough for whatever reason. They just won't. They don't. Maybe they don't want to be alone. Whatever the reason is. I never wanted that. I want that 100% soulmate level love, and that's what I told Henry when I told him I loved him. And yeah, and that is what I have now, and I am very grateful that I have it. And I'm not ashamed to say that I also had it with Rodney. And nobody will make me feel ashamed about that. I don't want to end on such a heavy note. Um, I'm trying to think of something. Rodney liked a lot of things. His favorite game was not Legend of Dragoon. It was Star Ocean. Star Ocean 2 specifically. Henry bought me Star Ocean 2. They remade it for the Switch. I mean, it's an old, old game. Like, they made it for PlayStation. I think it's even maybe a little older than Legend of Dragoon. And whenever they were showing the opening, they always have like an opening cinematic thing for games. I did shed a few tears because I was like, wow, Roddy would have loved this. Roddy would have been so obsessed because that was his favorite game. His favorite brand was Tool. This is one of his shirts. I actually still have a few of his shirts. I don't wear them super often because this one has a hole in it and they're obviously quite old. Literally, I know, maybe not this one, but his other Tool shirt he had like when he was like 15. And these shirts are like well over 10 years old. His favorite movie, God, is this cheesy ass kung fu parody called Kung Pao Enter the Fist. And it's pretty funny, but God, is it dumb. It's pretty funny though. Um, he also was a fan of the color scheme red and black, which so was I. He had vague goth vibes, so did I. Um, I mentioned we shared video games in common. He was a friend to everyone. Like, I don't know. Everybody that crossed his path was like, he's a cool guy. I really like that guy. Because he was just such a nice guy. He had that aura. As the kids would say now, he had that riz. Um, there's so much more to him than what happened at the end. And I really do hope that people do remember that. And I hope that this, how he passed away and how it affected me is not the only thing you take from this video. I hope you take, that he was a good person and a kind person and a funny person and so many other things. Okay, well, this was very emotional. And I'm a little drunk. I regret nothing. But I hope you guys have a good day. Hug your loved ones real tight and cherish people forever. And I know that's cheesy, but it's so real because life is so short. That is something else that I have like really taken away. And I think it's more of a positive is that life is short. I used to be like, oh, I have to white knuckle to get through things. Like, I have to white knuckle. And yes, there are points in life where you do really have to white knuckle to get through something. But like, I am like, gone are the days where I make myself miserable for the sake of whatever. Like, I really do think that being happy and finding happiness and finding purpose is the most important thing in life. It's not money, it's not status, it's not any of that. It all means nothing if you aren't happy. And I will always prioritize, finding happiness and having a purpose. And I think that I might not feel that way if I had never known Rodney. So that is a good enough note to end on. Take care of yourself. As Megan Ann, another YouTuber who does not know me, but I watch her videos, say, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, drink your water, and take your meds if you need them. And have a nice day.
So you think you could tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain? Can you tell a green field from a cold steel rail, a smile from a veil? Do you think you can tell? Did they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, hot air for a cool breeze, cold comfort for change? Did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in a cage? How I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, year after year, running over the same old ground. What have we found? The same old fears. Wish you were here.
Alright, now class, remember, it's all in the hips. It's all in the hips. Of course, I wouldn't mess up.